It's my pleasure to welcome Lord Karan Bilimoria to Network Capital. I've met him a few times in the Parliament at the India UK Achievers Award, and each time I've been struck by how well he speaks and the depth and breadth of his career. So today I thought I'm going to quiz him a little about the important moments in his life and career that have made him build his category of one. So Lord Karan Bilimoria, welcome again. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, firstly, for having me on your program, your podcast. And my early years, I was born and brought up in India, in in Hyderabad, where my mother's family are from, and my grandparents' old family home, Anand Bhavan, was base because my father was in the Indian Army, and we
Mhm.
moved around a lot. And every time he was posted to a non-family station on the border or fighting a war, we would be back in Hyderabad. And so I had this base, but on the other hand, I had a whole childhood of moving every 2 or 3 years. I went to 7 different schools, including the Hyderabad Public School, which has now some very famous alumni, including Satya Nadella, Microsoft, and Ajay Banga, the head of the World Bank, and I don't know how many former chief ministers of states in India, and it was a great school. And I ended up at a boarding school in Ooty, the last international British boarding school that is still there, 125 years old, and called Hebron. So this moving around, I think, was had a great effect on me in that you went to completely new places, had to meet new people, get to know a completely different culture. I mean, India is such a diverse country. So to
Mm.
go to school in Loyola School in Trivandrum as an 8-year-old in a Jesuit school, which was very strict. The headmaster and the Jesuit priests would be in their robes. I got caned once for taking comic books into school, um, and but it was being in that part of the world in Kerala was very different to say being posted in Rajasthan in the middle of the desert, and when my father was commanding a brigade in Bikaner in Rajasthan, or let alone Kalimpong near Darjeeling on the Chinese border near Sikkim and Bhutan. So I was very lucky to get to know India very well, thanks to my father and the different postings all around the country.
My colleague who you interacted a little bit earlier, her father also works in the armed services. And one of the founding theses she has is that there's something really unique about being, say, a defense kid that exposes you to the depth and breadth of India. And the children happen to be entrepreneurial and they happen to do really well. So, in a way, you're proving her thesis. But do you have any comment on that? Did that?
Well, there is. I mean, I've read a few articles about army children, armed forces children, and the the commonality is that you uh, have to be very adaptable because every time you move to a new place, you're going to a completely strange place, and you've got to get to know that place, meet new people. And what my parents always said and taught me was, wherever it is, people say, "Oh my gosh, you're going to this godforsaken place. It's a horrible place." We would always find it the most wonderful place because you'd
Mm.
always find interesting people. You'd always find something to learn about, and it made you learn and appreciate and be adaptable. And that adaptability is very important, particularly when you're an entrepreneur. I give a talk called Adapt or Die. Uh, and
Mm.
if you have that ability to adapt, it makes a huge difference.
And you've adapted all through your career. First of all, congratulations once again for being recognized as a fellow at London Business School. So that
Thank
was a
you.
recent honor.
Thank you.
I think the school's very lucky to have you. But tell me a bit about this mindset that you had from the beginning. How did that shape you setting up Cobra Beer, and how did that make you entrepreneurial overall?
In fact, it was at the London Business School. Had an article in their uh, alumni magazine, and they said, "We want you to tell us about when do you think you first realized you had the traits of being an entrepreneur." And I thought about it very carefully. And it took me back actually to Loyola School in Trivandrum as an
Hmm.
8-year-old boy. And I remember we loved being in Kerala. It was the most amazing place, very different to anywhere else in India that I've been to. We'd go to Kovalam Beach every weekend, which was fabulous, and swim and snorkel. And my father was commanding his battalion of Gurkhas, and his Subedar Major was a Victoria Cross holder from the Second World War. So, being brought up as a child with legends was just amazing, and living
Hmm.
with the Gurkhas. And then going to the strict Jesuit school. And I remember one day, there's suddenly a diktat. Everyone in the school will have to learn Malayalam, the local language. And of course, the school was English medium, but they said everyone now has to learn Malayalam. I remember thinking, I don't want to learn this language. Um, it's going to be of no use to me because my father's going to be posted out of here in a couple of years, and Malayalam is spoken nowhere else in the world except in Kerala. So I don't want to learn this language. So I went to the class and I protested, and they said, "Look, I'm sorry, this is the ruling. You've got to do it." I went back and complained to my parents, and I said, "Look, I don't want to learn Malayalam, so no use to me." They said, "Please go and learn Malayalam because you've been asked to do it. And by the way, you were caned for bringing comics into school. You'll get caned again. So just go back and learn Malayalam." I went back again. I said, "This is ridiculous. This is no good." So I complained again to my parents. They said, "Now we're going to report you to the headmaster." And so I went back again. And I thought, this can go on. And then I had an idea. I went to my parents and I said, "Why can't I learn Hindi? Because Hindi, I know I'm going to have to learn everywhere else in India, and I'm going to be examined on it later on. It's going to be useful to me. They don't
Hmm.
teach Hindi here in Kerala, so learn Malayalam." So I went back to the class, and I went back to my parents and I said, "There must be other children like me at the school, or army children, or from companies who are posted in Kerala, or any other expats in the city. They might also want to learn Hindi. Why don't you get a Hindi teacher?" My father went and spoke to the headmaster. Within a few weeks, we had a Hindi teacher, and there were 26 of us in that class. And I didn't learn Malayalam, and I learned Hindi. Now, what that taught me was, okay, you could say I was a rebel, but most importantly, from an entrepreneurship point of view, entrepreneurship is about problems, solutions, and action. So I could have complained all every day, and it would have got me nowhere. What you've got to do is find a solution to the problem that can be acted upon quickly. And so that's my earliest recollection of when I had the traits of being an entrepreneur.
What a fantastic story. Learning, to figure out your own path, not taking no for an answer. These are very helpful in finding your product market fit. So, when you went to the UK, what were the circumstances like? Did you go to the UK knowing that I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to start Cobra Beer, and life's going to turn out exactly how I planned? Or a lot of it was happenstance, serendipity, and explain that to us.
I first went to the UK when I was 11 years old. My father was posted to the UK for a couple of years as a lieutenant colonel. So I went to the local state schools, to a primary school and a secondary school in Wiltshire. Then I went back to boarding school to Hebron and Uti. And when I was very lucky, I skipped a couple of years. India was going through a change in educational system from a 11 plus 1 to university to a 10 plus 2. And I almost had to repeat 2 years. And then I got a lucky break and I went to Osmania University and did my Bachelor of Commerce honors degree. I went to university at the age of 16. I was thrown in the deep end and it was tough, very tough. That first year, all my contemporaries had done they knew what commerce and accounting and economics. To
Right.
me, it was complete double Dutch. I had no clue what they were talking about. But I immersed myself in my studies. I got through that first year, did very well, never looked back. And I always knew I would study in the UK because both my grandfathers had studied in the UK. My maternal grandfather went to Birmingham University in the 1920s to study commerce. It was the only university that actually taught business the first university in the UK to teach business. And he graduated in 1931. My father's father was at Sandhurst. There were a few Indians who were allowed to be at
Hmm.
Sandhurst in between the First and Second World Wars. My grandfather was one of them. In fact, they met as two fellow Parsis in the UK while they were students, little knowing they'd be in-laws some years later. And then my mother went to Birmingham University in the 1950s and read English and history of art. And her brother went there and did a PhD in engineering in the 60s. So I knew I would study in the UK. It was just a given. And when I was 19, I got a lucky break. I got a chance to qualify as a chartered accountant with what is today Ernst & Young, EY in London.
Hmm.
And my parents couldn't afford to send me to university here, but I could study for that 1 year foundation course and then do my articles and be paid while I was studying, which is how I
Right.
managed to do it. And because I was so young, I qualified when I was 24, and I managed to get a place at Cambridge. I had an audit at Cambridge University, fell in love with Cambridge. Cousin of mine was also there, and I went on to do a law degree at Cambridge. And once again, I got to skip a year, so I did, because of my Indian degree, I did it in 2 years instead of three. And it was while I was at Cambridge that I came up with the idea for Cobra Beer.
Were you also the president of the Cambridge Union?
I was the vice president.
You were the
I
vice
was,
president.
and I led the Cambridge Union debating team 2 years running against Oxford in our varsity debate. And my opponent, the leader of the Oxford Union, was Michael Gove, the former cabinet minister.
So you had you knew that politics and public policy would also interest you at some point, or was it purely the love of debating that took you to the union?
Well, I have to thank my headmaster at Hebron, who actually introduced debating competitions at the school where the whole school would attend. And I started debating at the age of 14. And
Hmm.
then my principal at my college in Hyderabad was a wonderful man, and he instituted debating competitions as well. So and then at Cambridge. So debating was a part of my life from a very early age, and I enjoyed it. And I was very interested in politics. So I knew at some stage I would get into politics. I didn't know when or how. And in
Hmm.
fact, in the mid 90s, one of my mentors who sadly passed away this year, Baroness Srila Flather, the first Asian woman to be a member of the House of Lords, um, she had an initiative that brought young Asians into Parliament, where we would have events and she'd have cabinet ministers speaking to us. We'd actually come into the House of Lords. That's how I
Hmm.
first started to get to know it in the mid 1990s, while after I started Cobra Beer. And then I got the opening to become an MP. And I almost went for the candidates weekend. And I realized then my business hadn't quite taken off. And if I became an MP, I'd have to focus on being a parliamentarian and I would have to take my eye off the business. And my business may never take off. And I decided not to go on that weekend and not to become an MP. And I think that's the best decision I made, because literally a year later, my business took off. And I never looked back. And then the opportunity to join the House of Lords came thanks to Tony Blair, bringing in what we call People's Peers, the House of Lords Appointments Commission, where anyone in the UK can go online and apply to become a peer. And I was sent a form in 2003 saying, "Why don't you apply?" And I thought, well, what have I got to lose? And it took 3 years, and I got in as an independent crossbench peer in 2006.
And you've been super engaged. We're going to discuss about your public life after we understand Cobra Bear and its foundation. So I'm an entrepreneur and an academic. I'm very interested in the early days when everything is unclear. You're obviously not like at Cambridge, you may have some experience with beers, but how did you decide that Cobra Beer is an idea worth pursuing? What was the market like? What was your thought process like? Walk us through that.
Yes, the idea originated from being, like many entrepreneurial ideas, either you're dissatisfied with the product or service and you think, I can do this differently, I can do this better, I can change the marketplace I'm going into, or you're passionate about something on one hand, you hate something on the other hand. So I loved beer from the time I was allowed to drink it, but I hated the fizzy lagers that I was drinking in the UK. And I found them very difficult to drink, very bland and bloating, and um, just not very nice beers. And
Hmm.
those are the lagers. And I love my food. I love my Indian food. I miss my Indian food. I couldn't cook when I came to this country, and I would go to Indian restaurants at least twice a week. And of course, with spicy food, the most popular um, drink by far is lager beer. Why? Because you want
Hmm.
something cold and refreshing. But if you get something cold, but it's bloating and bland and gassy, that's not very comfortable with spicy food. And an English friend of mine introduced me to real ale, and I've always loved ale in a pub, but I found I couldn't drink ale with any food. It was too heavy, it was too bitter, and it just didn't accompany food. And I thought, well, ale drinkers love curry, ale drinkers hate lager, um, but they're forced to drink this fizzy lager. And that's when the idea evolved, why don't I produce a beer that has the refreshment of a lager, the smoothness of an ale combined, that has a balanced, rounded taste that's easy to drink on its own, but also accompanies all food, and in particular Indian food. And that's where I got the idea for Cobra Beer. This, what our slogan to this day is, brewed smooth for all food. And it is the best beer in the world to accompany any food, and especially spicy food and curry.
Well, we can attest to that. But you didn't have too much experience. I mean, apart from maybe drinking beer, of manufacturing beer. It's not the easiest of processes. You have to establish a lot. How did you build that supply chain, that customer base? Because the market validation is absolutely correct. This segment of South Asians wanting sweet, spicy food and not, feeling too gassy after that. I think it's a large number. But what was the first, say, a year or two of founding Cobra Beer like?
Yes, when I first started in business, of course, you have to make the decision to start in business and take that leap. Instead of, in my case, with a commerce degree, law degree, qualified chartered accountant, I should have been an investment banker. Um,
Yeah.
and I decided to take the leap and be an entrepreneur. And I think the characteristic that entrepreneurs have more than anything else is guts. They have the guts to do it in the first place, to give up that other opportunity and take the riskier opportunity of being an entrepreneur. And of course, you then have to have the guts to stick with it when others would give up as well. So I decided to take the leap. I was young. I had no commitments. I had no family, no mortgages. I just had nothing to lose in that sense, and I had my education to fall back on. And that's what I
Hmm.
always say to students when I talk about entrepreneurship: is finish your studies, because it's important to have that qualification behind you, for a number of reasons, but also it's to fall back on. And when I started my business partner, I had £20,000 of student debt to pay off, with no experience in business. So first we said, let's build up experience of importing products from India and selling them, and just getting into that whole of sourcing, shipping, distribution, selling, marketing, finance,
Right.
all the ingredients of basic. And my first venture was polo sticks. I imported polo sticks from India because I led the first Cambridge University polo team tour to India. We'd beaten
That
Oxford
was
that year in the varsity match, and we'd done very well. And so I went back, and I came back with some sample polo sticks from this tour, and I started selling polo sticks to saddlers that I knew, and eventually to Lily Whites and to Harrods and to Royal Family Saddlers. So it was a small market, but it got me off the ground. And then we started sourcing high fashion garments. We sold to well known boutiques like Whistles, um, leather and silk goods that we sold to Selfridges, just building up experience, and also lots of dead ends. I mean, entrepreneurs never give up, but you also you need to know when to give up, which is completely contradictory. And I shared the platform with Jimmy Wales of Wikipedia, the founder of Wikipedia. We both said the same thing: entrepreneurs never give up, but they know when to give up. And of
yeah.
course, there was many dead ends, so we thought of importing pearls from Hyderabad, my home city. Any woman who goes to Hyderabad will come back with a string of pearls, because Hyderabad has this tradition for pearl
Right.
jewelry. We couldn't sell a single string of pearls because Mikimoto pearls from Japan were far better quality, uh, and better value for money. So you give up. I had the agency for Bombay Dyeing, the famous textile company in India, for their bath towels. We thought that we had a license to print money. We couldn't sell a single bath towel because the Portuguese towels were much better quality, and literally across the sea, very close by, lower shipping costs, and part of the EU. So we didn't sell a single bath towel. But we did sell a few things, build up the experience, and then whilst doing this, we got an introduction to Mysore breweries, the biggest independent brewers in India at the time, based in Bangalore. And that is how we started Cobra Beer, with that introduction to the brewery, completely by chance. And it was luck. I mean, the best definition of luck that I've ever heard is when determination meets opportunity. And this big idea was there in the background. And the moment I saw the opportunity, the introduction to the brewery in India, we started working on Cobra. It took 9 months to work on the project because, as you said, I didn't know anything about brewing. So I sat with the brewmaster in Bangalore at the brewery, who happened to be the best brewmaster in India, who'd spent 6 years in the Czech Republic, had a PhD in brewing from Prague University. And so he knew everything about brewing. I knew nothing about brewing, but I knew exactly the taste that I wanted. So I took 30 bottles, carefully selected, of beer from the UK. You could carry liquid in your hand luggage in those days, and sat in the laboratory with him, tasted these beers, trying to explain this less gassy, extra smooth taste to him. And that's how we created Cobra Beer from scratch. And it took 9 months to actually develop the product and ship the first bottles from Bangalore.
I feel that the name is a punchy one. How did you come up with it?
The name is actually, I always say, as a lesson of one of the big mistakes I made in my life. And I'll explain, because the brewery offered us their well-known brands, Pals, which is the name of a dog food in the UK, Knockout, which is their biggest selling brand, and even now is a well-known strong beer, 8% alcohol, with one boxer having floored another boxer on the label. So we said, it's not what we're looking for, won't be allowed. They said, okay, you don't like our brands. I said, we don't not like them, we can't use them. And so I said, well, why don't you choose your own brand name? Because your brand's going to fail, and we'll have the prestige of exporting beer to the UK, and then your brand can fail and we won't fail. Choose your own brand name. Now look at the luck of that. That's my most valuable asset, is the Cobra Beer brand. And then we chose the name Panther. And we could have chosen any name. My partner, Arjun Reddy, and I, we chose Panther. I handed in the artwork. We had it designed even before I went to Bangalore to develop the beer. Handed in the artwork to the printers. And I then focused on just developing the liquid and the other elements of packaging and shipping. And 2 weeks, the beer was maturing in the tanks, ready to be bottled in 2 weeks, when Arjun called me, and I was in Bangalore staying with my aunt, Gul Tata. And she said, look, Karan, Arjun's on the phone for you in the evening when I got back from the brewery. But Karan, I'm trying to pre-sell the beer. I said, well done. He said, I can't sell a single bottle. So what? Why? He said, nobody likes the name Panther. So what do you mean nobody likes the name Panther? He said, I don't know. They don't like the name Panther. My first reaction was, who cares what they think? Just think about that. Who cares what they think?
Mm.
And this went on for a while. And I said, okay, I'll tell you what. If you're so adamant, why don't you look up the list? We had hundreds of names. There was a second choice, that came a close second. He said, I've already done that. It was Cobra. I said, yeah, I remember Cobra. I said, why don't you ask these same people who don't like Panther whether they'll buy the beer if it's called Cobra? And next morning, I rushed to the printers on the way to the brewery. And the only time in my life I was hoping something was not done. Normally you're chasing things to be done. I said, have you printed those Panther labels? And they said, no, we haven't. We're waiting for the brewery to tell us. I said, don't print them until you hear from me. Next evening, came back to the brewery. Within 24 hours, Arjun phoned me back and said they love the name Cobra. So don't ask me why. I mean, to this day, I don't know why they didn't like Panther, but they liked
And they
Cobra.
like Cobra.
And so I phoned my brother Nadir, who had an advertising agency in Hyderabad. I said, Nadir, I need your help. The beer's about to be shipped in less than 2 weeks, and we've got to change the name completely and come up with a new brand, new label, new packaging. He said, fly over now. And his team dropped tools, and we just worked on it, came up with the Cobra Beer branding label, and the beer was shipped on time. And I've never looked back. And the lesson I've learned there is that as an entrepreneur, come up with ideas, but never go forward without checking it with your consumers and your customers first. And it's turned out to be a great name. I mean, it's got a feel that's contemporary, but yet it feels as if it's been around forever. We were going to celebrate our 25th anniversary some time ago. When we did some consumer research, consumers said, what, you're only 25 years old? We thought you were 125 years old. So we didn't celebrate our 25th anniversary. And also, and when we started, in those days, there were still retired British army officers who served in India before India's independence. I remember Cobra before the war, delicious beer. It didn't exist. So it's got this feeling that it's been around. So it's worked beautifully as a name, and it takes you back to India without doing it in an obvious or corny way.
Right.
So it's just been a great name. Short, punchy, powerful. And we never use a snake in any of our advertising or in the packaging. It's the name Cobra.
Tell us a bit more. Why not the snake? I'm glad that there isn't one, because I would be skeptical of drinking it.
People are scared of snakes, and and also there are many reasons we wouldn't want to use a snake. Wouldn't want to offend anyone.
Yeah,
and so we
of course.
never use the snake. Yeah.
But Lord Bilimoria, getting the business off the ground is one of the several difficult things that an entrepreneur has to do. What was some of the lessons of scaling the brand, of building the supply chain, expanding it? Now, obviously, you find it everywhere, but I'm sure that wasn't always the case in the first year or two or three.
When you start, of course, you got zero credibility. Nobody knows you. Nobody knows your brand. Nobody knows your product. Why should anyone supply you, finance you, or buy from you when you have no credibility? And I believe they do those things if you have the faith, the confidence, the passion for your brand and your product that gives people the faith to trust you to give you a chance. And it's always against all odds. I mean, we were up against the big beer brands. Carlsberg was in almost every Indian restaurant, one of the most famous beer brands in the world. Kingfisher, the biggest beer brand in India, had been here for 8 years before we started. They were brewing in the UK for 5 years before we started. You had Kingfisher on draft in thousands of restaurants.
Yeah.
Nobody thinks you stand a chance. My own father, by now, was commander-in-chief of the Central Army in India. And when I go to see him, I knew as an army officer in those days, particularly he couldn't afford to finance me in any way, but I thought he'd give me some moral support. And I said, Dad, come on, my own business, entrepreneur, Cobra Beer. What are you doing? All this education, you're becoming an import-export wala. Get a job. So he was trying to protect me because the chances are a lot of businesses fail, and so you're against the odds. People think you don't stand a chance, and of course, the big brands not only are well established, but they've got big pockets and deep pockets and lots of money.
They can outspend you.
I couldn't even afford a branded beer glass when we started. I'm not exaggerating. The only item I had was a flimsy table tent card printed in green and black. I couldn't afford full color printing, explaining the story behind Cobra Beer. So that's what you're starting against all the odds. Distributors are not interested in talking to you. The biggest distributor in the M25 wouldn't even meet us. So we started by selling the beer ourselves. And the strategy I had, which I call a breakthrough strategy, was I started with the best, most famous restaurants, and I convinced them to sell Cobra first. And I charged a premium price. That takes guts to, when you're a new entrant, when nobody knows you, you charge a higher price. And I had a double-sized authentic Indian beer bottle because the brewery didn't make small bottles. And I turned that obstacle into an advantage, saying, this is authentic beer imported from India in the original size that people buy beer in India. And people in India share beer. They don't buy my bottle, your bottle. And people share Indian food. So we got the sharing concept in the Indian restaurants where the waiters would leave the bottles on the table. People would share, would free the waiters to do other work. People at other tables would say, what are they drinking? Looks like a bottle of wine. Oh, it's a bottle of beer. I'll try it. It would spread like wildfire around the restaurant. So the obstacle to opportunity was one lesson. And then against all odds, when you do it, you've got to have this breakthrough strategy where you get the top restaurants to sell it. The product had almost a 100% reorder rate because they loved the extra smooth, less gassy taste. And then I was able to use a referral of the top restaurants to get other restaurants to sell the beer. And within 6 months, we were selling to 100 of the top restaurants in London in the M25 area. And my partner, Arjun, and I, driving around in a battered Citroën de Chevaux, which cost £295, called Albert. And you could see the road if you look down through the floor of the holes in the floor of the car. We carried 15 cases of Cobra Beer. If you put some of the front seat, back seat in the boot, needed push starting every day. And that's how we built up Cobra. Literally, the beer would come to our flat, a roof conversion on Fulham Palace Road, second and third floor, carry a ton of beer. Literally, a pallet of beer weighs a ton, 72 cases. Carry it all the way up the steps, carry it all the way down, load in the car, go and deliver and sell to the restaurants. Then the distributor said, we'd like to meet you. And that's how we got the distributors interested. And then the financing story is another story that's linked to that.
So I was coming to financing. You obviously had a degree in commerce. You were a lawyer and a chartered accountant. I think you may have a network of people who were in finance. How did you decide to take financing or not? And where did you get the initial capital? When you were expanding, what were some of the capital allocation decisions that you took?
Yes. I think that, I have this checklist that I have my 10 P's of building a business. First, a great product, and our case, premium product. Price, ours is expensive because it's a premium product. Place, you've got to have available. We started with the restaurants, then we got into supermarkets. We're now in 5,500 restaurants around the UK alone. as well as thousands of branches of supermarkets, and exported to 30 countries. The next is promotion. You've got to promote your product. So product, price, place, and promotion. And those are your 4 Ps of marketing if you studied marketing. And my extra Ps are people. We're a manufacturing business, but people is most important, whether it's B2B, B2C, services, manufacturing, people. Next P is finance, spelled PH, which I'll come back to. Can't do anything without the money. The next P is principles. Always better to fail doing the right thing than to succeed doing the wrong thing. And then it's passion. You've got to love what you're doing, follow your passion, not your pension. Next is partnership. And it's not just your business partner, but following a partnership approach that your employees are your partners, your shareholders are your partners, your accountants are your partners, your lawyers are your partners, your consumers are your partners, your suppliers are your partners. Everyone is a partner. And finally, profits. There's no point doing all this unless you make good profits. Maybe some losses in the early years, but you should end up making profits. And the finance part in the early days was the most difficult for an unknown brand to raise finance with no collateral. I mean, I had £20,000 of debt. Forget putting up anything as security. I had no security to offer. And that's when you have to be innovative with raising finance. And I believe that my education helped me a lot. I can give you a quick example in that with the biggest distributor in the M25 said, we want the exclusivity for the M25. We said, we'll give you the exclusivity because we've done some research and you're very wealthy and you have unutilized overdrafts, facilities you're not using. So what we would do is when the container arrived from Bangalore, shipped across on P&O, would arrive at the warehouse in the East End. We would follow it in Albert, wait for the container to be offloaded with the forklift truck, run upstairs and get a Victorian instrument called a bill of exchange. And let's say it was £20,000 for that container of beer, payable in 90 days, which the managing director would actually sign and accept. We'd take that bill of exchange. So he'd get his 90 days credit. We'd go to our NatWest, our bank in Fulham, before that, we'd go to their bankers, Barclays, go to Barclays in the city, go upstairs to their manager and say, here's £20,000 bill of exchange. He would allocate the £20,000 against the overdraft facility. No money was drawn down, just allocated against it. So we weren't using the money, we're just using the facility. He would then stamp the bill of exchange guaranteed by Barclays Bank. We would then take it to NatWest Bank in Fulham, present it to our bank manager, and there you had £20,000 guaranteed by Barclays Bank, payable in 90 days, discounted at the cheapest rate of interest because it's Barclays Bank, money in our bank account the same day, cash on delivery.
Wow.
Now, so it's being innovative in that way that we were able to grow, and then using government, small firms, loan guarantee scheme loans. The experience of getting those loans where the government guaranteed in those days 75% and then 85% of the loan helped us raise £250,000 in the early days, without which I wouldn't have been able to get Cobra Beer off the ground. Later on, when I was president of the Confederation of British Industry during the pandemic, I was able to use that experience in persuading the British government to do the bounce back loans, 100% guaranteed loans, because I said the money's not going to flow unless you guarantee 100%. And yes, there was some misuse of those loans, but on the whole, it saved thousands and thousands of SMEs who without that financing would not have survived.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it's so important to be mindful of cash because early days, there's this temptation now in entrepreneurs building companies post pandemic to just find product market fit, burn a lot of investors' capital. And that worked for a while until it didn't. And we can debate that. But being sort of respectful of cash flow is a critical lesson, especially for businesses that are complex, that require multiple levels of negotiation. You've scaled this brand. You've sort of found the pricing strategy. You have interesting relationships. You've also found a way to scale. What were some difficult times in setting up and scaling the business? And also, could you tell us what you did not do? Because strategy is saying no to good ideas for better ideas. So, would love to hear about both.
Yes. So, and by the way, on the topic of scale-ups, we have over 5 million businesses in this country, 5.5 million businesses. Only 38,000 of them are scale-up businesses. Businesses actually grow and create jobs. So it's a very small number of companies, and we grew at 40% compound year on year for the first 18 years, 40%. That's
Goodness
staggering
me.
growth. The mistake I made, and one of my favorite sayings is good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. So there's no shortcut to making the mistakes. And what I did was I took up too much debt, and too much debt grew very quickly, sacrificing profits for growth. And when the financial crisis hit in 2007, 8, and 9, I nearly lost my business because I'd grown too quickly. And suddenly a business which then in 2008 was worth £100 million, Diageo, the biggest drinks company in the world at the time, was going to take a 30% stake for £30 million and put one director on our board. And they pulled out of that deal 2 weeks before Lehman Brothers went bust. So I nearly lost my business at that time as well. So 3 times I nearly lost my business. The worst was during the financial crisis. And the lesson I learned there was, at any time I could have slowed down the growth and showed and proven my ability to make profits. And that is what we've done since then. For 15 years, we've had a joint venture with Molson Coors, and we've had very, very solid profits throughout when we focused on the profits rather than the growth. And so that's a mistake that I made. And in terms of saying no to things, yes, from very early days, people would say, "Why don't you start your own chain of Indian restaurants? You're perfect. There is no
a very tempting idea.
There's no national chain." I said, "But I'll be competing against my own customers, so I can't do that." That's I've never done that. Although many times people have come to me with ready-made business plans to start up chains of Indian restaurants, and I've never done it.
Fantastic. Do you want to tell us a bit about the decision-making framework for the joint venture and what led you to that, and how did you ensure that the partnership was a win-win for all stakeholders involved?
Yes. So when the third time I nearly lost my business ended up being a joint venture and a very painful restructuring of the business, where I nearly lost the business, but we managed to save it by forming this joint venture with Molson Coors, one of the largest brewers in the world. And the joint venture is very based on Molson Coors saying, we want this for 3 reasons. One, we want you as the founding entrepreneur, as the chairman of the joint venture, which is what I have been for the last 15 years. And also, we want your team, and the vast majority of my team came across for the joint venture. And thirdly, you've got an extraordinary brand. And brand is very important. I think whether it's a B2B or B2C business, a brand is extremely important. And to be an extraordinary brand, there's 6 criteria. One, it's going to be based on an undeniable brand truth. In our case, the extra smooth, less gassy taste is our platform. Secondly, extraordinary brand has an instantly recognizable and iconic look. An extraordinary brand never cuts any corners and always lives by its principles and practices integrity. An extraordinary brand produces a relevant and consistent experience. So in my case, millions of bottles and cans and pints of beer that have to taste exactly the same, hundreds of millions of them a year. An extraordinary brand also builds loyal brand champions. So that's when people love your brand, they seek out your brand, they're disappointed if it's not available. And finally, an extraordinary brand also produces extraordinary profits. So what has got me through the 3 crises, each of them was different, each of them I didn't predict, was having a strong brand, having the support of a really good team and family. I met my wife 1 year after I started Cobra. Without her support, I wouldn't be here talking to you now. So family and team support, and finally, practicing integrity. It is better to, as I said earlier, to fail doing the right thing than to succeed doing the wrong thing. And integrity, the best definition I've ever heard, is as a Zoroastrian Parsi. I'm patron of the Zoroastrian Parsi community in the UK. I welcomed Rowan Williams, at that time the Archbishop of Canterbury, to our centre in Harrow. I made the welcoming speech, and he said in his speech, Lord Bilimoria has used the word integrity 3 times, and the Zoroastrian Parsis are renowned for their integrity. And he said the word integrity comes from the Latin and Greek words integer, integrum, which mean wholeness. You cannot practice integrity if you're fragmented in front of the light. You can only practice integrity if you're complete and whole. And I've never forgotten that. So having a strong brand, family and team support, integrity, and you can get through any crisis.
Fantastic. Brian Armstrong once said that entrepreneurship is going from setback to setback with enthusiasm. And I think listening to your journey, our listeners will definitely attest to it. I want to switch gears to personal habits and influences. So you spoke a bit about your wife. I'm interested in learning a bit more about what does a week, a month in the Bilimoria Lord Bilimoria household look like? What is your learning routine? How do you structure your time, your emotion, your energy? And the goal for asking this question is to help young professionals really figure out how to manage their energy and time.
Yeah. So in a business, you always have to have a mission, and the mission in our case is to brew the finest ever Indian beer and to make it a global beer brand. And a mission is something you can measure. So you're constantly setting targets and measuring. And if I may say with pride and humility that we have produced the finest ever Indian beer. We've won 152 gold medals since 2001. And in terms of global beer brand, I'm nowhere near there, but we export to about 30 countries in the world. We brew here in the UK, in Belgium, in Serbia. There is much more scope, so I can measure my progress. But more important than that is your vision, which is your attitude. And our vision is to aspire and achieve against all odds with integrity. And that's almost like a definition of entrepreneurship. That means you want to get somewhere, you've got all the odds stacked against you, you have little or no means, and you go out there and you make it happen. But most importantly, you do it the right way with integrity. So it's that attitude to me that is the most important thing. And in my life, there is no one particular day. There is an underlying theme of whether you want to call it the growth mindset, of whether you want to call it constant curiosity or continually wanting to learn. It's one of my favorite sayings of Mahatma Gandhi's is live as if you're going to die tomorrow, learn as if you're going to live forever. And this whole concept of non-stop learning. So, and I practice what I say in that 8 years after I started Cobra, I mean, the first 8 years, just head down, getting the brand to take off, and it did, fortunately. Then I went to the Cranfield School of Management, which I'm an alumnus of. I went to the London Business School, which I'm an alumnus of, and I went to the Harvard Business School, which I'm an alumnus of, all through executive education. And I've just finished the first year of my doctorate at
Oh,
Cambridge, at the Cambridge Arch Business School. So I'm doing an actual PhD. I'm fortunate to have received a few honorary doctorates, but now I'm doing the real thing. So that non-stop learning is a continued part of my life. And House of Lords is the most wonderful place because it's the chamber with the greatest depth and breadth of expertise of any parliamentary chamber in the world multiplied by 20. And every time you go to the House of Lords, even if you're not speaking, you learn. So I think we've got that mindset of constantly wanting to learn. And the other thing in my life is I do different things. So I've got my business, I've got my parliamentary life, I've got my academic life. I've just stepped down after being Chancellor of the University of Birmingham for 10 years. Before that, I was for 5 years Chancellor of what was then Thames Valley University and became the University of West London. I was the youngest university chancellor in the country. I've got 2 fellowships at Oxford and 2 fellowships at Cambridge, and I love my academic life as well. So, quite apart from my UK India world, which is a daily aspect, since I was the UK chair of the Indo British Partnership and founded the UK India Business Council and chair the All Party Parliamentary Group on India Trade and Investment. So, there are all these aspects of my life, and what you've got to learn is constantly every day has many parts of this in a day. And you've got to learn to be able to switch off from one thing onto another thing very quickly. And you've also got to learn to juggle lots of different things by being able to do the switching on and off. But the only way I can do it is with some excellent support. So I've got a fantastic team that helps me, allowing me to do all these different wonderful opportunities that I've been lucky to have been given.
so most people who know you call you a learning machine, and your sheer number of fellowships and degrees attest to that. But why a PhD? That has to be a very, very thought through decision because it's not the most pleasant of degrees to go through, from what I hear.
Well, it took a year. Just the proposal phase and getting admitted took 1 year. I almost felt it as if I'd done a mini PhD just to start the PhD. And the first year has been very rigorous. I've had to attend 5 courses over 3 terms and produce a final report, which is almost 16,000 words, and assessed internally and by 2 external examiners, including in Europe. So it's been very rigorous, and I had to get a first class to pass just to get through to the next stage. So it's been much more rigorous than I imagined. And now I start my fieldwork and my research and my interviews from now onwards, which I'm really looking forward to. My doctorate is on leadership. It's on an aspect of leadership that has not I believe, been covered before, and I hope will provide some valuable insights which will be useful to leaders all over the world. And the expectation of this particular doctorate is not just to get your thesis and your PhD, but to write a book as well, which
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to. And I'm passionate about
that'll
leadership,
be
so I've been lucky to have witnessed it firsthand with my father, for example. It's something I've always been very, very passionate about.
well. I can't wait to read the book because this will be fascinating. And Cambridge is lucky to have you back again. But we in Oxford would love to have you come and teach and share some of your experiences as well.
Always there, always. And because when I do my work at Oxford, and people say at Cambridge, "But you're a traitor. How can you do this?" And I say, "Well, I've got like a famous Indian economist once said, if you have one foot on hot coals and another foot on cold ice, on average, you're comfortable. Um, I've got one foot in dark blue and I've got one foot in light blue. That makes me a true blue."
Well said. Um, Lord Bilimoria, do you think about questions like legacy, succession, all of these things?
The best lecture that I've ever attended was by Professor Clay Christensen, one of the most famous business professors who's ever lived at the Harvard Business School. It was the final lecture before I formally became an alumnus of HBS. And it's a lecture I'll never forget. He came into this lecture, 6'8", giant of a man, and he apologized right up front. He said, "I'm so sorry, it's the first lecture I'm giving." There were two sections, so almost 200 of us in the lecture room. And he said, "I've been very ill. I've had cancer. I beat the cancer. I had stroke. I recovered from the stroke. It hasn't affected my movements, as you can see, but it's affected my mind. I can't always say the words that I want to say. If that happens in the lecture, shout out the words. It might save some time." We
Hmm.
had to shout out the words many times. And at the end of it, he was in tears and we were in tears. And the message of his lecture was very simple. That have you stopped and thought, what is the purpose of your life? And it's so important. How many of us actually stop and think, what is the purpose of my life? And he said, linked to that, how will you measure your life? And he's written a book, How to Measure Your Life. Fantastic book. And it includes his
I've read
time at
that.
Oxford as a student at Oxford. Um,
Hmm.
so that is, to me, what is really important is if I've been inspired by my father a great deal, but I've also been inspired by my maternal um, great grandfather, Didi Italia, who was a member of the Rajya Sabha. He was an entrepreneur, nearly lost his business 3 times, ironically in the liquor business in the districts of Andhra Pradesh, in the times of Nizam of Hyderabad. He then became a great philanthropist, public servant, and eventually parliamentarian in the Indian House of Lords in the Rajya Sabha. So in many ways, 4 generations later, through his inspirations, I'm almost following in his footsteps here in the UK. So if whatever I have done or I'm doing can in any way inspire future generations, then it might have been worth it.
It sure is worth it. Lord Bilimoria, is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't, or any parting words that you'd like to share with us? This has been a masterclass in entrepreneurship, leadership, and thinking about life at large. But you're a man of many interests. Stace, you're a parliamentarian. You've chaired committees. Of course, there's India, UK. Um, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you firstly for asking me such a wide-ranging, wonderful questions covering so much ground. So thank you so much. And really, I suppose the last message is the world we live in today is a very, very uncertain world. And I think it's a very challenging world. And it's how do you deal with and approach um, constant uncertainty. And if you look back over the last quarter of a century, the huge world changing events that have taken place, the black swan events that hardly anyone has predicted. I mean, who predicted 9/11 and the horror of that and how it changed the world? Who predicted the financial crisis? Her Majesty the Queen in 2009, so 2007, 8, 9 financial crisis. Um, she went and opened a new building at the London School of Economics, the LSE, in 2009. She said to all these famous economists, "Why didn't any of you see it coming?" And how many economists actually foresaw the financial crisis? If you look at the global pandemic, the worst pandemic since the Spanish flu 100 years before, the biggest crisis globally since the Second World War, how many people predicted that would happen? So I could go on about all these giant events that affect the whole world. And it's the approach of how you deal with these events that is so key. And I go back to the three things that saw me through my crises to be able to deal with crises apply very much. But fundamentally, I think it is having that inner belief, and if you have that inner belief, I think that helps you face these enormous challenges and uncertainties that will always be there. Which takes me to my favorite saying of Mahatma Gandhi's, which, if I may paraphrase, is your beliefs become your thoughts, and your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits form your character, and your character determines your destiny.
Thank you, Lord Bilimoria. This has been memorable. Hopefully, we can do this offline in Oxford or London one of these months. I'll coordinate some time with your office.
I'd be delighted. I love Oxford, and I would love to return whenever you ask me to.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe to Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll apprise you of the next episode and make you part of our community. Thank you very much.